Good afternoon. I'm Karen Pearson, and I chair FIT's Sustainability Council. And it is my great pleasure to be joined today by two wonderful FIT community members. Mimi Prober, who is an FIT alum. She graduated in 2012 with a degree in fashion design and worked specifically on special occasion and couture work with a minor in the history of art. Also joined by Professor Susanne Goetz, who's an associate professor in the Textile and Surface Department and really a leader in intersectional work where we look at how science and design and working with craft and artisans really impacts the future and helps us create pathways that are much more sustainable in nature. And Mimi, for those of you who don't know, her work after leaving FIT has been celebrated by many, and quite frankly, right now, the most exciting piece is to note that you can view her work at the Metropolitan Museum, and that exhibit is actually, I can read it correctly, will be there through September. So please make sure after our conversation, you actually take a second to look at both of their work, but go and visit Mimi's work. And during today's conversation, we're really going to look at how Mimi's work has intersected within the pillars of sustainability and used that to inform her process and the mindfulness of it. And in the end, we're going to shift this to a focus on a discussion that both Mimi and Susanne have had extensive work in, which is the process of natural dyeing and doing it using a variety of materials, including food waste, which is something that Mimi has most recently been working on. So without much more ado, it's my great pleasure to start this conversation off and give Mimi a chance to start and talk a little bit about her story and journey from studying fashion design at FIT to now being a leading designer who is creating collections, getting those roles, has her work displayed in a variety of different venues and different capacities. So I'm going to pass it to Mimi and let her talk a little bit about that story before we talk more specifically about dyeing. Mimi.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a pleasure to always be included in a part of FIT. FIT is still very close to my heart. As was mentioned, I graduated in 2012, and I actually kind of started exploring my philosophy of integrating antique textiles to establish a sustainable future through my time at FIT, through my thesis collection. So basically, I used antique textiles from the 18th to early 20th century, and that's how I established my philosophy. Everything was very much hand draped, hand embroidered. It was about sharing the textile story and all of those narratives, as well as I also explored natural dye during that time. And that is kind of how my brand has slowly grown and started. I am still doing that kind of work today. With our work today, we do also work internationally and locally with artisans around the world, whether it's creating our custom textiles with fiber farms, as well as employing all of the handcraft techniques such as lace making, hand weaving, hand spinning, using all organic natural textiles, as well as still the antique textiles, which are a pillar of our work. And then, of course, natural dyeing. So natural dyeing, it has always been a signature of our brand. Everything that we do is only naturally dyed with botanicals and our signature watercolor techniques. And our brand in general is based on 4 sustainability pillars, which is preservation, farm to fiber, ethical production, as well as community engagement. So
Great. I mean, Mimi, that sounds fantastic. And I would love to see a few examples maybe of the processes you're working with to lead everybody in the different kinds of design you work with and what those look like.
Sure. I mean, so I guess I'll start with like preservation, which is our first sustainability pillar. So again, going back to my work at FIT, we use antique textiles and share those textile narratives through our design. So we integrate these antique textiles through our zero waste techniques. I will say it is very important to me that we preserve these processes, as well as be mindful of what we're using. So that's carried on into the handwork that we do. We work with, again, artisans from around the world. One of our most recent collaborations is with a wonderful women's lace guild in Kollam, India. So we work solely with them to create handmade lace. So they work still with the techniques of handmade lace, and it's really, really exciting and something that I think needs to be preserved and cherished. There's all of these handworks that really have the ability to disappear. So we do all of these things very mindfully, slowly. It's all, very, very, very much part of community. And then with the farm to fiber, we create custom textiles with local fiber farms, as well as mills. So we've worked with vicuña, Paca vicuña, as well as Cormo wools, and we work with upstate New York farms that are wind and solar power based. And we've created these custom textiles where they have actually the antique lace or textiles embedded within our pieces. So that's signature to ours. And really, it's really about textile creation at the end of the day, as well, again, talking about community and artisanal work. And then with the natural dye processes, so we use fresh and discarded flowers. So again, I know this conversation is really going to be a lot about the natural dye techniques. I look at flowers in a very unique way. I actually love flowers that are, at its end of life. You can reuse those in your natural dye process. So we do a lot of what I call watercolor botanical hand painting, and it's kind of bundling those flowers, steaming them, or transferring them into our collections. Each season we have a new natural dye process that we integrate new natural colorways. We've used also food waste, which includes avocado, as well as in our spring collection, we've done imprints with dahlia, as well as eucalyptus, and then little imprints of onion skin, along with other botanicals. So really it's a full circle process, and each little piece, we try to share that story and work with all of the people that inspire us, and hopefully will bring this industry forward for the next generation, really with the idea to reshape and rethink the way we create and how we do business in our industry.
That is fascinating. I put two different notes of places I would love for you to spend a little bit more time talking about how you work on these traditional methods that more relate to the textile creation. So not necessarily the dyeing, but more the weaving, and the actual creation of the garments. I know we'll talk much more about color and that aspect of design in a bit. But that component, along with the target of making items zero waste, I think would be a really interesting thing just to spend a little bit more time on here.
Sure. So all of our textiles are custom made. We actually create each textile, whether it's with the antique textiles to create our one-of-a-kind textiles, or like patchworking it together, hand embroidery, or working with artisans, again, around the world, who are doing beautiful work, and hand weaving, hand spinning, hand knitting, all of those crafts that really are at risk to go extinct. It's really important for me to support them in all the ways that we can. So with our custom textile creation, not only are we using the antique textiles in our atelier, we do the custom textiles as well with the farms. We're working with these artisans who are hand weaving and hand spinning organic silk, organic cottons, creating your base textile that we then natural dye, or we've also recently expanded into a lot of hand knitting, and we work with a wonderful family group that is also near and dear to my heart in Ladakh area. So they are the hand knitting, it goes from again from the farm to the fiber, but it's not really a farm. So Karnak Nomads source the pashmina that we work with. It's again full circle in that the pashmina cashmere is then hand spun by these family artisans in Ladakh, and they're all interconnected. They're all related, and it's just the most beautiful fiber. And I think something other than just like supporting the process, you really feel the difference in the textiles as well. So I know like I know sometimes there's like questions of like, you know, what's vegan, or, you know, should you use wool? And I think it's important, if we're going to talk about a wool in general and in these farms and mills, that if it doesn't hurt the animal, if the people are caring for them. So it's really, really important to know your sources, to visit your sources if you can, to establish that community, that connection, because there is so many wonderful things happening with these farms and these animals that we need to support. So I think that's important to say. To not just cancel out, you know, a textile because you've heard full small scale people doing brilliant work and preserving these crafts, and the caring for the animals. It's the whole process that I could go on forever about, but
Maybe following up on that, I'm curious how you make the connections with the artisans you work with.
yeah, so I've been very lucky in that it's kind of been like friends who are also working in different spaces, like that introduced me to the wonderful knitters that we've worked with. The lace making, I actually saw I don't remember where, but it was very hard to get a hold of them, and it was wonderful because this friend who I'm working with in the knitting, they don't speak English, so it turned into me establishing a friendship with uh, someone else to be able to translate, and then we've been able to communicate through them. But as far as like, you know, the local farms and all of those things, you know, I go upstate and visit and actually create with these farms. We work with for the Paca Vicuña, which is a I know you're familiar with it because I was working the last time we connected on that. But this wonderful family-run sustainable farm in Missouri, and they take care of those rare camelid breeds. If you're not familiar with alpaca vicuña, it's a mix between an alpaca and a vicuña. So it really has some of the softest, most exclusive fiber in the world. And just again, watching them care for these animals, you'll see like their grandchildren care for them, and you can just like, I mean, they're not pets, but they are, you know, they're part of the family. I mean, it's such a special thing to see when people really, really care for that. But really just like, you know, as much research as possible and making those connections with your community to try to see what is possible and how you can support them. I think that's really you know, the bottom line in my work is I'm really trying to obviously create, you know, beautiful clothing, but it's really beyond that. It's really about supporting these businesses and being able to take it forward for the next generation.
And how do you communicate these origin stories and the process to your customers?
So actually, so, you know, I try to show as much of the process as possible. I don't know if you're going to be able to see these, but we have source cards and tags that we use on our pieces. So each tag, which is actually a whole other story, we work with a paper maker who does botanical dyes and is a kindred spirit of mine. And we make these custom tags. You'll see like the little fragments of the laces or the antique textiles. And then on the back, we have the entire story about the piece. And I have like photos that we can include as well if we're able to. But then also for the natural dye, you'll see it'll say like variation of the natural dye is unique to the individual piece, and then botanical and earth color evolves with time. It's really part of its intrinsic beauty, and it's one of a kind by nature. So it's important to discuss with your customers, that it is special. It really just emphasizing the specialness of the piece and all of the hands that went into the creation of the garment and its story, its collection, how it was made, where it was made, the natural dye color. We try to include it all as best as possible.
I love that you're trying to include all aspects within the supply chain, and also really also celebrating that first part in the supply chain, which is about the farming and the creation of the fiber itself and the importance of that piece in the supply chain, and not just thinking about circularity or zero waste in the design process, but thinking about it further back within the supply chain. So I think that's a really important point to talk about in this conversation, is the idea that when we do talk about circularity and zero waste, that we're not just speaking of it in the design process. It really goes to include the entire supply chain, which really brings us back to that initial creation or the farming component for natural dyes, whether they come from food waste or others, and also from the fiber itself. So I think that's a really important portion of your story and of the philosophy you're celebrating in thinking about it as a community that we're building.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that very much, because really it is, like I said, about how the textile is made, thinking about all of those hands. Like as a designer, like, majoring in fashion design, like it is beyond just about a good design. It's really fun knowing where your fabric came from. Like that was something that when I was at FIT, I almost left fashion design because I was kind of discouraged. I mean, this was in 2012. Sustainability wasn't really like, talked about the way it is now, but I just didn't like going and getting yards and yards of fabric from a fabric store. Like I wanted to know where that fabric came from. I wanted to know the story. I wanted to be a part of preserving that story. And there's just so many hands and elements throughout the supply chain beyond just making beautiful clothing that I think need to be celebrated. And it does really begin with the textile, whether, it's an organic textile that's grown, or the animals that you work with, or the farms and the mills, and the natural dye process. Yes, it's so multifaceted.
And maybe, can you tell us more about how you're sourcing your natural dyes or your food waste that you're dyeing with?
Yeah, so our original natural dye process primarily was using botanicals. So discarded flowers that we'd rescue from florists. I also foraged from our backyard. I mean, some of my first natural dye experiments was with our mulberry trees in our backyard. But as we've grown, and again working with different communities and expanded our botanical colorways, as well as, production, and it like can no longer be just me natural dyeing every piece. I've wanted to find new partners to create with, and one of those partners that we work with is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Their Green Matters Natural Dye Company. It's a natural dye house that focuses on small to larger scale production. So we've been able to kind of scale up our production processes with them. But again, I know they do collaborations as well with, like, restaurants or things like that. So really you can save your own food waste. You can go to restaurants and have that conversation, discuss with them. I mean, there are, I think, so many amazing places, especially in the city in New York, that avocado, for one, is like one of the most widely eaten things, but they make a beautiful color. I mean, start those conversations with your community. Florists, they do have a lot of waste, and I know that most of the ones that I speak with are very happy to past that waste, which again is not really waste if you think about it beyond that, into something that really comes full circle. I mean, again, it's really that community and collaboration and finding partnerships and having that conversation. You know, people don't realize that food waste or botanical waste or just waste in general can, you know, make really beautiful pieces. And in a lot of ways, I don't really think of it as waste. It's more like the next step in its journey and how we can make that come full circle into a way that really lasts forever. And I mean, that's part of what I really love about using botanicals is, you know, I love, you know, fresh flowers. I love outside. I love spring, you know, all those wonderful, beautiful things of nature. Um, Gardening, you know, it's such a healing and meditative process. You can transfer that into the botanicals or even bark or mud dyes or however you want to create. You can make pigments. I mean, this is just even beyond clothing. You can do paints from natural dyes. You can do so many things that you can create pigments naturally. And back, you know, historically through time, you know, that's what people did before before the mass world took over.
That's true. And I love how you talk about rescuing flowers and giving them a new life. That's wonderful. It also really contributes to how much emotion you imbue in your designs, right? And where they get a value that is beyond the garment itself, and the meaning and the wider connection is in there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like for me, um, I don't want to create things that necessarily already exist or that, you know, it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy on so many different levels to create. Whether you're doing it sustainably or not sustainably, you know, it's still a lot of energy. So for me, it's not worthwhile to do it unless it's really impacting the people and the planet and those that we're working with, because we have just so much in our world. And I really, really think it's important to think mindfully and ethically and in every way that you create, even beyond clothing.
Mhm. And have it working when you started working with natural dyes, has that changed your work, your process as a fashion designer? And if so, how?
So for me, like even when I again was at FIT, I actually had a bad experience with chemical dye at FIT from something we had to dye to match pieces, and this very harsh chemical dye was recommended to us, and it like seeped through when we discarded it, seeped through everything, and I was like, that is the end. I'm never never touching chemical dyes again. So it was kind of like embedded in me, and that's when I started exploring natural dyes really. You know, it started through tea dyeing and very, like I said, the mulberries and all of those things. And I've really expanded it over the last decade. So yes, it definitely is a core of our brand. Like we don't use anything but natural color, and that's very important to me. And what I try to do is also painterly color. So it's not just, you know, your solid colors, although even those are so beautiful and have such depth to them. If you, you know, see the difference between natural color and not natural color, you'll see that the colors really are alive. So yeah, so each season, like I had mentioned, we explore new natural color, new techniques, new ways that we can share our story and make things add to our botanical palette, and explore that. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, great. And then coming from your experience and you're scaling up your company now, where do you see the limitations on opportunities of scaling up natural dyes?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you know, it's really interesting because when I first started what I do, you know, especially integrating antique textiles or natural dyeing, I never thought that I would be working with like larger retail stores. I never thought that would be an experience necessarily. Again, going back to like, you know, almost 10 years ago, like this really wasn't talked about. Buyers weren't looking for things that it's not that it's not consistent, but had a special aspect to it in the store. You know, it was back in the day, I feel like it was very much like everything had to be, you know, exactly the same. Natural dyes cannot be like that. So I think you have to have a discussion with your retailers if you're selling wholesale, your customers directly. Again, it's about education. We really, really need to re-educate the consumer as to how these colors are alive. They will take on new lives. You know, that is its uniqueness to it and its specialness to it. It's not a defect. So making that very clear in your marketing or in like with the tags, the communication, how you have that. And then of course, you know, there is like, you know, a science behind actually creating it. It's not just, you know, let's create and see what happens. Like there does have to be a certain range. So you can't just like sell something and then deliver a completely different color. Like that's not going to work. But again, like for us, and with our partners that we work with, you know, the water that we use is only rainwater from a cistern. So the pH levels and all of those things, it can vary. The dye stuff, if we're using like reclaimed dye stuff, you know, whether it's discarded flowers or food waste or anything like that, plants, they're not going to produce the same exact color in each lot. And so, you know, from sampling to production, you do have a variation, even from like, you know, lot to lot. And again, it's about communicating that, having that be an open conversation, explaining that clearly, making sure you're, if you are, you know, selling to a store, that your store understands that and can communicate that to their customer, because you're not always going to be there to talk about it, having as much information as you can about it. And also educating them about wash care. So like our labels, I mean, I think wash care is really important conversation to talk about. Our labels specifically say to use a pH neutral, gentle detergent, to hand wash on cold, or, you know, you can put it through the machine, but again, cold, you're not going to want to use like a Tide, for example, necessarily, because Tide is like made to remove stains. You know, you get like these stain things, and natural color, it's the pH, and you can talk about that a lot better, I think, in detail than I can. But just to touch the surface, like it's really important to share the wash care explicitly. And even like when we're doing the indigo, you know, sharing with the stores or the retailers that to make sure the way that you display it, if you're going to display it in a window, you know, because the lights will change different aspects of the botanicals. And for me, like I'm very like, I love natural color, so I love the whole transformation it has. But you're not going to want like, if you're, if you have a garment on display like indigo half and half, you know, it's going to turn funny ways. So again, it's just about re-educating, caring for your garment, knowing how to care for your garment, and making sure that longevity is there. And then I mean, to just touch a little bit more on that, in our processes with the botanical color that we use, because we do sell to consumers or to retailers, you have to also make sure what products, like what botanicals you're using. So there's, you know, some of them are not as light fast, or they're more, you know, they're not going to last, they're fugitive, they don't have that longevity. So it's educating yourself on what is possible to use to achieve that color, because not all plant matter will actually stay on your garment. And then if we're going to go really in depth, the mordanting process is also critical to keeping long lasting color on your garments.
Yeah, I love how much you educate the wider public about the complexities of textiles and dyes and the interplay of all these factors in there. I think it really helps with fostering an appreciation of the process on the product.
Yeah. That'll be
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And as a chemist, I love hearing about you both speak about these intersectional points where we really see the intersection of truly science intersecting with this because you've just touched on many key principles both in chemistry itself, but also in color science and how we both study and characterize that. I mean, those are all key concepts that I would have taught in both of those courses. So that's really great. I was left wanting maybe both of you to talk a little bit about how somebody who heard this and says, wow, this seems like it should be accessible to me to try and explore and figure it out. How did you, can you explain a little bit more in detail about that process of exploration and how you in the end taught yourself what makes what colors, how we can do the actual process of natural dyeing? Because it's a real stretch for somebody who's been so prescribed to say, well, you know, I'm going to take this out of this box and I'm going to get red. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Or to get even like just in general, but it's possible with a lot of work and it is really beautiful. So I think like, I mean, FIT has incredible programs that you can learn the science behind, because I just think it's that we're going to go into the science. Like, I'm not a scientist, but I've learned so much about, you know, it's it's a it is that intersection of science and art, which is very exciting to me. So, you know, FIT has wonderful programs. If you're not at FIT, you there really is so much knowledge out there now. But one place I really always recommend for dye explorations, Botanical Colors. They have wonderful dye stuff that you can buy. Just beginning, they have recipes and processes, and they have wonderful things like that that you can start exploring, but also just, you know, experimenting, wearing what you make and seeing how it washes and lasts. Really, it is, you know, about educating yourself through multiple areas as you can, and exploring that. I mean, I'm still learning, and I always find natural color so exciting because it's alive and it's living, and there's an endless amount of knowledge that you can gain.
Yeah, I agree. And in the last, I want to say 10 years, before that too, but we saw a number of new books coming out that are really working with natural dyes on different levels, on a very introductory, do yourself, at your kitchen at home, and then at a level also that is more in-depth and explains the chemistry behind it. And what the lovely thing about working with natural dyes is you can start off on there's a very low threshold to cross, working with just tea dyeing, for example, or coffee grounds or onion skins. And I think for somebody who's really interested in it, that naturally the progression would be to learn more and to get more complex by, for example, working with mordants. And of course, at some point you get to the point where you really have to understand what's happening here, and that there can, even when we talk about natural dyes, that there can be levels of toxicity involved in there. And you want to make sure your process and your precautions are correct, and that you're not using a pot that you use for cooking, for working with your mordants. So it can start off very simple, it can get very complex, and I think everybody just have to remember chemistry is everywhere. It's not like natural dyes are not chemistry. They are.
Absolutely.
The chemist in the room loves to hear that, Suzanne. Thank you.
It's true. And you know, realizing that complexity, and then some of the points you touched on, Mimi, like how do we increase the light fastness of color or shift the hues? And there you enter the realm of becoming an expert and really understanding the complexity and what the process behind it is.
Yeah, no, it's
Um,
so important. The especially not mixing your food, the things that you consume with your, and then yeah, so that is so very important. And then like you said, you can get different color palettes from the same dye stuff with your different mordants, or even the pots that you use. If you're using like a copper pot versus a stainless steel pot or things like that. So yes, that is very important. Thank you.
So Mimi, you already shared a lot of advice. I'm just wondering, is there any advice you want to share with new designers that are inspired by your work?
I think it's like really important to really, like I said before, do your research as much as you can, investigate your sources and what you're looking to achieve, and just something uh if we're going to talk about like antique textiles, since it is becoming more prevalent now, I think it's also important to be mindful of how you're using these pieces and making sure you're not, if you are using antique textiles, not using necessarily pieces that still function as their intended use, because I have a I have a big fear, and I know I've said this a few times over the last few months, but as it does become more popular, I think we need to educate ourselves about the history of the textiles and make sure that we're not um, using any pieces that really should be at the museum, for example, as its original intended purpose. So really it's just, uh, getting involved as much as you can on all of the different paths. And it's not just design, really. It's textiles, science, history, everything in that kind of concept, if you are looking to be more mindful in the way that you create.
I think it's so important to talk about the mindfulness in creation and understanding all of the steps within the process. Really from the very beginning and that very raw component and that transformative power that we've really been discussing. I think a lot of, if you really step back and look at our conversation today, it looks at how we're transforming things and also the intersectional points and all of the points that matter along the way, which I think is a really exciting component of this as well. I would love to hear just a touch before Susanne may have a few other thoughts or questions, but from a practicing designer, a true creator, a studier, explorer, a scholar of textiles and dyeing, how does it feel to now have your work be shown? It's shown at the museum at FIT as part of the permanent collection. You now have the exhibit at the Met. You've had your garments worn by very mindful consumers on very large stages. How do you feel that really helps contribute to the voice of change and power for sustainability and true study of, I'm going to call it artisanal craft within fashion and design?
Well, I mean, like I said in the beginning, FIT is very near and dear to my heart. I've had wonderful collaborations with after graduating with the textile department. I Some of the hand weaving that we've done is with Professor Nomi Kleinman, who is a dear friend of mine. We've worked with President's Sustainability Grant for flax. So when Professor Silberman, who has since retired, he grew the flax, and we did a wonderful project with the New England Flax and Linen Group, and then made handmade lace and made a jacket. So, I mean, it goes beyond. And then, of course, the museum at FIT, which is one of my favorite museums, and dear friends as well. Now, after graduation, I've gotten the pleasure and honor to work closely with Colleen Hill, who did the exhibit Fashion Unraveled, where one of our botanically dyed corset gowns were in, and is now part of the permanent collection at FIT. I mean, for me, the Met is so beyond just like having my work there. My relationship and appreciation for conservation and preservation and curators in museum fields is just very deep. I mean, I did my internship at museums, so so museums are very important to me. Most of my mentors are from the museum world. Phyllis Magidson from the Museum of the City of New York really was the first one who saw my collection at my thesis in FIT, and actually that was our first museum experience that we had. They did an exhibit called Made in New York back at the South Street Seaport Museum with the Museum of the City of New York, and our thesis collection was on view. So it's a very like close relationship that I have. But the Met, obviously, like words cannot express. I mean, that's just so many layers of a dream to me. As far as seeing your work, you know, in these ways, I think, I mean, obviously, like it's very, I feel very appreciative that people appreciate it. And I've always said, like, for me, it's again, at the end of the day, like, I think the idea of sustainability and mindfulness and all of these things are what we should be having in the industry. Like, it shouldn't be a discussion. So I've always said from the beginning, it's like peeling back different layers. So you see a garment, you resonate with the garment. At the end of the day, like the consumer's still going to, or whoever's wearing it or admiring it is going to appreciate it on a visual level. And I think it's important then to have those layers of that conversation so it becomes more meaningful and you can really understand all of those aspects that go into making, because like I said in the beginning, like it's whether or not you're doing things sustainably or not sustainably, there's still so much energy, there's still the hands that make it, like it doesn't stop. So we need to do it in a mindful way for our future generations, for the industry, for it shouldn't even, in my opinion, be a conversation of a different section, if that makes sense.
Makes sense perfectly. Suzanne, some other thoughts you might like to add here?
Well, I think Mimi just wrapped it up perfectly with this statement. I think it's really, and one of my questions would have been, how do you see yourself changing or impacting the fashion industry? And I think you just outlined that really well.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel so strongly about the hands that make these things that are involved from the farm to the fiber to the final garment. And it being done in a way that respects the work of all the individuals, because at the end of the day, however you're creating, people are actually making it, and we need to respect that.
Yeah. We do in the artisan industry often see this distinction between a designer and an artisan and a craftsperson. And I think that's something really important you just said there, to not make this what is sometimes really a very artificial distinction and more about a hierarchy than the work that is done, that you're actively working to break that down and involve everybody in this process and give them a voice as well, and show what their work has contributed to the overall project.
Yeah, and I think it's important for those, we all wear clothes, for us to understand where they came from, and again, re-educating that consumer the value of clothing. It's a very long, hard road that we have ahead of us. Big change starts small, and I think it's so wonderful to see so many small companies and designers and just the next generation really grasping onto this. So I really have hope for our future, that this will no longer be just a general topic of like a very close topic of conversation. It's not, it just is. It'll be the way we work in the future.
I will second that, and I will take it from here and say, I think the points that you're both bringing up and sharing are this it is very true that small changes in the end by a large group of people end up having large impact. And so I think every small change we make in terms of how we break silos, how we start communicating, how we collaborate, how we look at things from an intersectional perspective at all different levels, really in the end gives us this great opportunity to change the impact of things that, yes, we must every day. I'm pretty sure everybody wants me to wear clothes to work every day. So we all need clothes every day. So I think we're not going to stop needing clothes. We're never going to totally stop being a consumer of clothing or textiles in that way, especially here in the Northeast. So I think how we make them and what those are is really impactful. And it's a place where designers can have a great impact. But so can the consumer by choosing to invest in those pieces and to support the work by people who are really committing to their own core values as it relates to sustainability in that space. And so it is my great pleasure to thank both of you for spending time this afternoon and sharing your work, sharing your experience with natural dyeing and creation of textiles and garments, and really transforming how we consider the pillars of sustainability within color as it connects to fashion and design in this space. So again, thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon, Mimi and Suzanne. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, and I will endlessly learn from FIT, and it's such a pleasure to learn from the both of you, and I really look forward to seeing the rest of the conference as well as what everybody's doing at FIT. It's really exciting, and thank you for always including me.